Continuing Agesilaus from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. I think we were at the law did not impose this harsh rule on the heirs apparent of the kingdom, but Agesilaus, whose good fortune it was to be born a younger brother, was consequently bred to all the arts of obedience, and so the better fitted for the government when it fell to his share, as is other people who are trained physically, mentally, morally, whatever. It's even more important that the rulers are trained as such. Hence it was that he proved the most popular tempered of the Spartan kings, his early life having added to his natural kingly and commanding qualities the gentle and humane feelings of a citizen, while he was yet a boy, bred up in one of what are called the flocks, or classes. He attracted the attachment of Lysander, and was particularly struck with the orderly temper that he manifested, for though he was one of the highest spirits, emulous above any of his companions, ambitious of preeminence in everything, and showed an impetuosity and fervor of mind which irresistibly carried him through all opposition or difficulty he could meet with. Yet, on the other side, he was so easy and gentle in his nature, and so apt to yield to authority, that he would do nothing on compulsion. Upon ingenious motives he would obey any commands, and was more hurt by the least rebuke or disgrace than he was distressed by any toil or hardship. He had one leg shorter than the other, but this deformity was little observed in the general beauty of his person in youth, and the easy way in which he bore it, he being the first always to pass a jest upon himself, went far to make it disregarded, and indeed his high spirit and eagerness to distinguish himself were all the more conspicuous by it, since he never let his lameness withhold him from any toil or any brave action, neither his statue nor picture are extant, he never allowing them in his life, and utterly forbidding them to be made after his death. He is said to have been a little man, of a contemptible presence, but the goodness of his humor, and his constant cheerfulness and playfulness of temper, always free from anything of moroseness or haughtiness, made him more attractive, even to his old age, than the most beautiful and youthful men of the nation. Theophrastus writes that Ephors laid a fine upon Archidamus for marrying a little wife, for, said they, she will bring us a race of kinglets instead of kings. Well, in America, the average height of a murderer is actually shorter, so it depends on what you want, right? While Agis, the elder brother, resigned, Alcibiades, being then an exile from Athens, came from Sicula to Sparta, nor had he stayed long there before his familiarity with Timea, the king's wife, grew suspected, insomuch that Agis refused to own a child of hers, which, he said, was Alcibiades's, not his, nor, if we may believe Duris the historian, was Timea much concerned at it, being herself forward enough to whisper among her Helot maidservants that the infant's true name was Alcibiades, not Leotacidas. Meanwhile, it was believed that the armor he had with her was not the effect of his love, but of his ambition, that he might have Spartan kings of his posterity. This affair being grown public, it became needful for Alcibiades to withdraw from Sparta, but the child, Leotacidas, had not the honors due to a legitimate son paid him, nor was he ever owned by Agis, till by his prayers and tears he prevailed with him to declare him his son before several witnesses upon his deathbed. But this did not avail to fix him in the throne of Agis, for after whose death Lysander, who had lately achieved his conquest of Athens by sea, and was of the greatest power in Sparta, promoted Agesilaus, urging Leotychidas's bastardry as a bar to his pretensions. Many of the other citizens also were favorable to Agesilaus, and zealously joined his party, induced by the opinion that they of all his merits, of which they themselves had been spectators in the time that had been bred up among them. Now, it shouldn't matter what your parents did. It matters what you and yourself believe, keeping people from honor and dignity because of what their parents did or were even rumored to do. Because it doesn't sound like people knew. But there was a man named Diopithes at Sparta who had a great knowledge of ancient oracles and was thought particularly skillful and clever in all points of religion and divination. He alleged that it was unlawful to make a lame man king of Lacedaemon, citing in the debate the following order: "Beware, great Sparta, lest there come of thee, though sound thyself and halting sovereignty, troubles both long and unexpected too, and storms of deadly warfare shall ensue." And what in Latin, I'm sure that sounds better, but maybe it doesn't. We don't know, unless we see. But Lysander was not wanting with an evasion, alleging that if the Spartans were really apprehensive of the oracle, they must have a care of Leotychidas, for it was not the limping foot of a king that the entities cared about, but the purity of the Herculean family, and to whose rights, if a spurious issue were admitted, it would make the kingdom to halt indeed. Agesilaus likewise alleged that the bastardry of Leotychidas was witnessed to by Neptune, who threw Agis out of bed by a violent earthquake, after which time he ceased to visit his wife. Yet Leotychidas was born alive 10 months after this. Was born above 10 months after this. Okay, so it's obviously not the child. But not, some entity comes to you in your sleep and leads you towards suspicion. They're not always, being honest. One of the three, I don't mean daemon, I mean demon. Well, of the daemon, I guess there's the good one, I guess you could refer the light beings to that, the unfallen angels, but, yeah, one of the sources of dreams, yeah. So making accusations because you have a dream that somebody's considered the possibility, maybe, but not. Agesilaus was, upon these allegations, declared king, and soon possessed himself of the private estate of Agis, as well as his throne, Leotychidas being wholly rejected as a bastard. He now turned his attention to his kindred by the mother's side, by the mother's side, persons of worth and virtue, but miserably poor. And if it's from yourself, you're thinking, well, there's a possibility, and perhaps there's something that you should, that there's something you can do something about to change the possibility of something occurring. To them he gave half his brother's estate, and by this popular act gained general goodwill and reputation, in the place of the envy and ill-feeling which an inheritance might otherwise have procured him. What Xenophon tells us of him, that by complying with, and, as it were, being ruled by his country, he grew into such great power with them that he could do what he pleased, is meant to apply to the power he gained in the following manner with the ephors and elders. These were at that time the greatest authority in the state. The former officers, annually chosen, the elders holding their places during life, both instituted, as already told, in the life of Lycurgus, to restrain the power of the kings. Hence it was that there was always from generation to generation feud and contention between them and the kings. But Agesilaus took another course. Instead of contending with them, he courted them, and all proceedings he commenced by taking their service, was always ready to go, nay, almost run, when they called him. If he were upon his royal seat, hearing causes and ephors came in, he rose to them. Whenever any man was elected into the council of elders, he presented him with a gown and an ox. Thus, while he made a show of deference to them and of a desire to extend their authority, he secretly advanced his own and enlarged the prerogatives of the kings by several liberties, which their friendship to his person conceded. To other citizens he so behaved himself as to be less blamable in his enmities than in his friendships, for against his enemy he forbore to take any unjust advantage, but his friends he would assist even in what was unjust. If an enemy had done anything praiseworthy, he felt it shameful to detract from his due, but his friends he knew not how to reprove when they did ill. Nay, he would eagerly join with them and assist them in their misdeed. So one of the poisons of the heart is your company choices, right? And thought, or well, maybe it's not your choice, but and thought all offices of friendship commendable, let the matter in which they were employed be what it would. Again, when any of his adversaries was overtaken in a fault, he would be the first to pity him, and be soon entreated to procure his pardon, by which he won the hearts of all men, insomuch that his popularity grew at last suspected by the ephors, who laid a fine on him, professing that he was appropriating the citizens to himself, who ought to be the common property of the state. For it is the opinion of philosophers that, could you take away strife and opposition out of the universe, all the heavenly bodies would stand still, generation and motion would cease in the mutual concord and agreement of all things. So the Spartan legislator seems to have admitted ambition and emulation among the ingredients of his commonwealth, as the incentives of virtue, distinctly wishing that there should be some dispute and competition among his men of worth, and pronouncing the mere idle, uncontested, mutual compliance to unproved deserts to be but a false sort of concord. And some think Homer had an eye to this when he introduces Agamemnon, well pleased with the quarrel arising between Ulysses and Achilles, and with the terrible words that pass between them, which he would never have done unless he had thought emulations and dissensions between the noblest men to be of great public benefit. Yet this maxim is not simply to be granted without restriction, for if animosities go too far, they are very dangerous to cities, and of most pernicious consequence. When Agesilaus was newly entered upon the government, there came news from Asia that the Persian king was making great naval preparations, resolving with a high hand to dispose the Spartans of their maritime supremacy. Lysander was eager for the opportunity of going over and succoring his friends in Asia, whom he had there left governors and masters of the cities, whose maladministration and tyrannical behavior was causing them to be driven out, and in some cases put to death. He therefore persuaded Agesilaus to claim the command of the expedition, and by carrying the war from Greece into Persia, to anticipate the designs of the barbarian, he also wrote to his friends in Asia that by embassy they should demand Agesilaus for their captain. Agesilaus, therefore, coming into the public assembly, offered his service upon condition that he might have 30 Spartans for captains and counselors, 2,000 chosen men of the newly franchised Helots, and allies to the number of 6,000. Lysander's authority and assistance soon obtained his request, so that he was sent away with the 30 Spartans, of whom Lysander was at once the chief, not only because of his power and reputation, but also on account of his friendship with Agesilaus, who esteemed his procuring him this charge a greater obligation than of preferring him to the kingdom. Whilst the army was collecting to the rendezvous of Gerastus, Agesilaus went with some of his friends to Aulis, where in a dream he saw a man approach him and speak to him after this manner: O king of the Lacedaemonians, you cannot but know that, for yourself, there hath been one general captain of the whole of the Greeks, namely Agamemnon. Now, since you succeed him in the same office and command the same men, since you war against the same enemies, and begin your expedition from the same place, you ought also to offer such a sacrifice as he offered before he weighed anchor. Agesilaus at the same moment remembered that the sacrifice which Agamemnon offered was his own daughter, he being so directed by the oracle. Yet was he not at all disturbed by it, but as soon as he arose, he told his dream to his friends, adding that he would propitiate the female entity with the sacrifices a goddess must delight in, and would not follow the ignorant example of his predecessor. He therefore ordered an hind to be crowned with the chaplets, and bade his own soothsayer perform the rite, not the usual person whom the Boeotians in ordinary course appointed that office. Now, that's understandable why in Arabic the word kahin, the access controller priest, gets gets labeled as this soothsayer is another way to say it. But really, you should be able to do your own rituals without hiring somebody. When the Boeotian magistrates understood it, they were much offended and sent officers to Agesilaus to forbid his sacrificing contrary to the laws of the country. Now, the laws of a country shouldn't forbid people their religion. If they're going to allow animal slaughter, they should allow animal slaughter ritually. I mean, if you're going to pay for animal slaughter, fine, pay for animal slaughter, but these having delivered their message to him, immediately went to the altar and threw down the quarters of the hind that lay upon it. Agesilaus took this very ill, and without further sacrifice immediately sailed away, highly displeased with the Boeotians, much discouraged in his mind at the omen, boding to himself an unsuccessful voyage and an imperfect issue of the whole expedition. When he came to Ephesus, he found the power and interest of Lysander, and the honors paid to him inseparably great. All applications were made to him. Crowds of suitors attended at his door, and followed upon his steps, as if nothing but the mere name of commander belonged to satisfy the usage to Agesilaus, the power of it being devolved upon Lysander. None of all the commanders that had been sent into Asia, well, there was conquering into Asia, but you know what I mean. It's not the same thing as Asia, the continent, was either so powerful or so formidable as he. No one had rewarded his friends better, or had been more severe against his enemies, which things having been lately done made the greater impression on men's minds, especially when they compared the simple and popular behavior of Agesilaus with the harsh and violent and brief-spoken demeanor which Lysander still retained. Universal preference was yielded to this, and little regard shown to Agesilaus. This first occasioned offense to the other Spartan captains, who resented that they should rather seem the attendants of Lysander than the counselors of Agesilaus. And at length Agesilaus himself, though not perhaps an envious man in his nature, nor apt to be troubled at the honors redounding upon other men, yet eager for honor and jealous of his glory, began to apprehend that Lysander's greatness would carry away from him the reputation of whatever great action should happen. He therefore went his way to work. He first opposed him in his councils. Whatever Lysander specially advised was rejected, and other proposals followed. Then whoever made any address to him, if he found him attached to Lysander, certainly lost his suit. So also in judicial cases, anyone whom he spoke strongly against was sure to come off with success, and any man whom he was particularly solicitous to procure some benefit, for might think it well if he got away without an actual loss. These things being clearly done by chance, but constantly and of a set purpose, Lysander was soon sensible of them, and hesitated not to tell his friends that they suffered for his sake, bidding them apply themselves to the king and such as were more powerful with him than he was, such sayings of his seeming to be designed purposely to excite ill feeling. Agesilaus went on to offer himself a more open affront, appointing him his meat carver, and would in public companies scornfully say, "Let them go now and pay their court to my carver." Lysander, no longer able to brook these indignities, complained at last to Agesilaus himself, telling him that he knew very well how to humble his friends. Agesilaus answered, "I know certainly how to humble those who pretend to more power than myself." "That," replied Lysander, "is perhaps rather said by you than done by me. I desire only that you will assign me some office and place in which I may serve you without incurring your displeasure." Upon this, Agesilaus sent him to Hellespont, where he procured Spithridates, a Persian of the province of Pharnabazus, to come to the assistance of the Greeks with 200 horse and a great supply of money. Yet his anger did not so come down, but he thenceforward pursued the design of wresting the kingdom out of the hands of the two families which then enjoyed it, and making it wholly elective. And it is thought that he would, on account of his quarrel, have excited a great commotion in Sparta if he had not died in the Boeotian war. Thus, ambitious spirits in a commonwealth, when they transgress their bounds, are apt to do more harm than good. For though Lysander's pride and assumption was most ill-timed and insufferable in its display, yet Agesilaus surely could have found some other way of setting him right, less offensive to a man of his reputation and ambitious temper. Indeed, they were both blinded with the same passion, so as one not to recognize the authority of his superior, the other not to bear with the imperfections of his friend. Tissaphernes, being at first afraid of Agesilaus, treated with him about setting the Grecian cities at liberty, which was agreed upon, but soon after, finding a sufficient force drawn together, he resolved upon war, for which Agesilaus was not sorry, for the expectation of this expedition was great, and he did not think it for his honor that Xenophon with 10,000 men should march through the heart of Asia to the sea, beating the Persian forces when and how he pleased, and that he at the head of the Spartans, then sovereigns both at sea and land, should not achieve some memorable action for Greece. Okay, they do mean Persia, but they do mean Asia as the continent here. And so to be even with Tissaphernes, he requites his perjury by a fair stratagem. He pretends to march into Caria, whither, when he has drawn Tissaphernes and his army, he suddenly turns back and falls upon Phrygia, takes many of their cities, and carries away great booty, showing his allies to break a solemn league was a downright contempt of what was considered to be gods and goddesses. But the circumvention of an enemy in war was not only just but glorious, a gratification at once and an advantage. Being weak in horse and discouraged by ill omens in the sacrifices, he retired to Ephesus, and there raised cavalry. He obliged the rich men that were not inclined to serve in person to find each of them a horse, armed and mounted, and there being many who preferred doing this, the army was quickly reinforced by a body not of unwilling recruits for the infantry, but of brave and numerous horsemen. For those that were not good at fighting themselves hired such as more military in their inclinations, and such as loved not horse service substituted in their places, such as did. Agamemnon's example had been a good one when he took the present of an excellent mare to dismiss a rich coward from the army, when by Agesilaus' order the prisoners had taken in Phrygia were opposed to sale. They were first stripped of their garments and then sold naked. The clothes found many customers to buy them, but the bodies being, from the want of all exposure and exercise, white and tender-skinned, were derided and scorned as unserviceable. Agesilaus, who stood by at the auction, told his Greeks, "These are the men against whom ye fight, and these the things ye will gain by it." The season of the year being come, he boldly gave out that he would invade Lydia, and this plain dealing of his was now mistaken for stratagem by Tissaphernes, who, by not believing Agesilaus, having been already deceived by him, overreached himself. He expected that he should have made choice of Caria as a rough country, not fit for horse, in which he deemed Agesilaus to be weak, and directed his own marches accordingly. But when he found him to be as good as his word, and to have entered into the country of Sardis, he made great haste after him, and by great marches of his horse, overtaking the loose stragglers, who were pillaging the country, he cut them off. Agesilaus, meanwhile, considering that the horse had outridden the foot, but that he himself had the whole body of his own army entire, made haste to engage them. He mingled his light-armed foot, carrying targets with his horse, commanding them to advance at full speed and begin the battle, whilst he brought up the heavier armed men in the rear. The success was answerable to the design. The barbarians were put to the rout. The Grecians pursued hard, took their camp, and put many of them to the sword. The consequence of this victory was very great, for they had not only the liberty of foraging the Persian country and plundering at pleasure, but also saw Tissaphernes pay dearly for all the cruelty he had shown the Greeks, to whom he was a professed enemy. For the king of Persia sent Tithrastes, who took off his head, and presently dealt with Agesilaus about his return into Greece, sending to him ambassadors to that purpose, with commission to offer him great sums of money. Agesilaus' answer was that the making of peace belonged to the Lacedaemonians, not to him. As for wealth, he had rather see it in his soldiers' hands than his own, that the Grecians thought it not honorable to enrich themselves with the bribes of their enemies, but with their spoils only, yet that he might gratify Tithrastes for the justice he had done upon Tissaphernes, the common enemy of the Greeks. He removed his quarters into Phrygia, accepting 30 talents for his expenses. Whilst he was upon his march, he received a staff from the government at Sparta, appointing him admiral as well as general. This was an honor which was never done to any but Agesilaus, who, being now undoubtedly the greatest and most illustrious man of his time, still, as Theopompus has said, gave himself more occasion of glory in his own virtue and merit than was given him in this authority and power. Yet he committed a fault in preferring Pisander to the command of the navy, when there was when there were others at hand, both older and more experienced in this, not so much consulting the public good as the gratification of his kindred, and especially his wife, whose brother Pisander was, having removed his camp into Pharnabaz's province, he not only met with great plenty of provisions, but also raised great sums of money, and marching on to the bounds of Paphlagonia, he soon drew Cottus, the king of it, into a league, to which he of his own accord inclined, out of the opinion that he had of Agesilaus' honour and virtue. Spithridates, from the time of his abandoning Pharnabazes, constantly attended Agesilaus in the camp, whithersoever he went. This Spithridates had a son, a very handsome boy, called Megabates, of whom Agesilaus was extremely fond, and also a very beautiful daughter that was marriageable. Her Agesilaus matched to Cottus, and taking of him 1,000 horse, with 2,000 light armed foot, he returned into Phrygia, and there pillaged the country of Pharnabazes, who durst not meet him in the field, nor yet trust to his garrison, but getting his valuables together, got out of the way, and moved about up and down with a flying army, till Spithridates, joining with Herippidas the Spartan, took his camp and all his property. Herippidas being too severe an inquirer and a plunder, with which the barbarian soldiers had enriched themselves, and forcing them to deliver it up with so much strictness, so disobliged Spithridates with his questioning and examining, that he changed sides again and went off with the Paphlagonians, the Sardes. And I mean, it's one thing if you got somebody that's like, okay, they're not going to take part in the battle, but preventing the army, that not allowing the army, not trusting the not allowing the army to go fight, right? That's a whole new level of cowardice, or loss of your position, really. Not loss of your position, but misuse of your position, kind of, go down in infamy, really.